So the next James Bond book is confirmed. It's called A Spy Like Me by Kim Sherwood. It is coming out on April 23rd, 2024, and I thought I would make a video talking about it. So stay tuned. Hi guys, it's me. It has been a hot minute since I made a video. I'm sorry, my life has it hasn't quite been going according to plan, you know, but we KBO, keep buggering on. But I thought it was important to make a video because we've got something exciting on the horizon. In April of next year, we see the next book in Kim Sherwood's Double O trilogy. September of last year, we got the first book in her Double O trilogy, Double or Nothing. It's a really interesting premise of James Bond, the agent we know and love, has gone missing, and there are 3 other 000 agents who have to unravel the mystery of where he's gone, what happened to him, and hopefully get him back. And that book was it was a real departure from what we have generally had from Ian Fleming publications. You know, it's a James Bond book without James Bond in it. And it was by a brand new author who's not familiar to people who had read James Bond books before. So it was a bold choice by Ian Fleming Publications. Did it work out? Well, you know what? There are some people who absolutely adore Double or Nothing. David Trowbridge Ellis, who runs License to Quit, to me, it's like seeing his reaction to the book is just heartwarming. It's I think a really important thing to have a book set in a literary universe that is so culturally significant and give people who might not have seen themselves in it before the opportunity to do that. But I thought, while we're here, let's just talk about Kim Sherwood's book, her trilogy, what it means to the Bond community, the position it puts her in, and yeah, what we can expect. And what can we expect? Well, we don't have a huge number of details yet. Kim Sherwood sent out the sort of synopsis of it, so we'll delve into that in a second. HarperCollins has released some essential information. The first thing you need to know is A Spy Like Me is going to be 352 pages long, which means it's a chunky boy. 352 pages roughly equates to about 100,000 words, and I think roughly it's about the same size as Double or Nothing, which is another chunky boy. I think that was about 360 something pages. So it's a big book, and that's interesting, and we'll go into that in a bit. And it's the second book in the trilogy. And the world is different since Kim Sherwood's first book came out in September of last year, because Kim has been unleashed on the Bond community, and what a wonderful thing to have unleashed on the Bond community. Kim Sherwood is such a delight. It's been so lovely to follow her on Instagram and subscribe to her Substack newsletter and see all of the amazing things that she's been doing. For me, one of the most exciting things is, of course, she has another book, which is not a James Bond book, that has been released, which is by Virago, who is, I would call them a feminist publishers. They were quite big in the 70s. I think they really gave the opportunity to publish a lot of very influential, famous feminist writers. So it's a feminist publisher, and this is a feminist book about feminist pirates, I guess. I don't know. It has a lot of people mention the word feminist with it, but to me, it's a cracking good pirate romp. And I don't know. It's, to me, you don't need to say feminist when you're talking about a pirate book, because have you ever read a pirate book or watched a pirate movie in which there is not some woman who has to live as a man and cross-dressing is such a part of the pirate myth? So I don't know. I enjoyed it a lot, especially because this book is set in Devon. In England, and I know Kim lived in Devon, in Kingsbridge, for 10 years. I lived in Devon for years. I went to school went to high school in Tiverton in Devon, and then I went to sixth form college in Plymouth, and I lived in Cornwall for years. I'm obsessed with history. I love pirates. I love adventure. So, you know, Devon and Cornwall, it's as close as you get to the wild frontier of England. It's full of mystery and magic and adventure. There are stories of smugglers and pirates and highwaymen. When I was at school, my parents moved house, so I actually lived in a pub a little village called Rackenford, called the Stag Inn, and that was the haunt, the literal haunt of Captain Tom King, who is known as the Gentleman Highwayman, and he was partner of Dick Turpin, who was a famous highwayman, and they used to roam around having like highwayman adventures, stealing stuff off people, and his ghost is still said to haunt the Stag Inn. And funnily enough, I got a couple of weird ghostly experiences I had while I was living in that place. So yeah, Devon and Cornwall and that particular period in history is like so wild and evocative and cool. So I love that book, and I love seeing Kim post all these pictures of her going to like these seaside towns in Devon, and it just brings back such nostalgia to me. And the other places that Kim has been have not been insignificant either. In fact, she was speaking at the Hay Festival in Hay-on-Wye recently. Hay-on-Wye is this amazing town in England. It's basically like the entire town is a secondhand bookstore. You go there and it's like there are just bookstore after bookstore after bookstore. It is heaven on earth. And Hay Festival is this really, really significant literary festival. And there we have our Kim Sherwood. And we call her our Kim Sherwood because we in the Bond community embrace her because she's awesome to see that, see her on stage representing Bond nerddom for the world. It's amazing, yeah. So it's been a real treat to see how her career is developing and how people are taking notice of her. And she's been working really, really hard as well with the Substack newsletter that goes out. She and David Trowbridge Ellis from License to Queer have teamed up. They've done live streams and interview videos, and it's really cool to see them become like a dynamic duo. And I don't know, it's invigorating. It fills me with joy to watch this. And I also think that Kim has definitely been embraced by the Bond community. And I think part of that is because she is one of us. I mean, in one of the emails she sent out, she explained how like the first time she bought a James Bond book was From Russia with Love, and she was 12. And I think most of us equate to like discovering the literary Bond around that age. I think the first James Bond book I read might have been From Russia with Love. I don't know, flicking through it, thinking it was racy in a school library. But yeah, it's wonderful to see somebody who is clearly properly into Bond actually have an opportunity to be part of this incredible literary legacy. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting to see that, and let's delve into like A Spy Like Me. What is it about? Well, I'll read the synopsis. Here we go. An elite team of MI6 agents must go undercover to unravel a smuggling network funding violent terror. Dun, dun, dun. That's the big, bold headline. Then 6 days, 3 agents, 1 chance to find James Bond. Dun, dun, dun. I like the stuff. Blurbs. I get paid to write blurbs for other authors because it's really quite tricky. So, you know, I appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into this. Here we go. James Bond is alive. Barbara Broccoli, take note. Or at least he was when he left a clue at the black site where the insidious private military company Rattenfänger held him captive. MI6 cannot spare any more lives attempting to track down one missing agent. No exceptions, even for Bond. But Joanna Harwood, 003, has her own agenda. Sidelined by her superiors while she grieves the loss of a loved one, Harwood goes on an unsanctioned mission to find 007. Meanwhile, MI6 has another problem. A bomb has been detonated in London. 00 agents on the trail of the terrorists responsible acted quickly to prevent mass destruction and save lives. But MI6 failed to neutralize the nation's enemies before they could strike, and one of their own was seriously injured in the blast. They won't fail again. Assigned to root out the source of the terrorists' funding, Joseph Dryden, 004, and Conrad Harthrop Vane, 000, enter the field. Tracing clues from Sotheby's auction house to Crete to Venice, they uncover a money laundering scheme involving diamonds, black market antiquities, and human trafficking. Once a major sale is made, a 6-day countdown to the next terror attack begins. As the 00s follow the twisting trail, they find themselves unexpectedly inching closer to Bond. Ooh, there we go. Have to admit, this synopsis is like a synopsis. It tells a lot of the story. I don't think you quite needed to go into the depths of that, but it's kind of exciting. And it's kind of nice because it continues from some of the events that happened in Double or Nothing. We definitely get the hint that maybe James Bond's going to be in this one. And I do really like the fact that Kim's trilogy doesn't have James Bond in it, because I think as I'm going to mention in a second, like it's an incredible responsibility to write a James Bond book, and I think not having James Bond as the primary character gives Kim a certain amount of freedom and leeway to explore the things that she wants to explore in writing this without having that crushing pressure. It's like Charlie Higson's book on His Majesty's Secret Service. That was like a proper meat and potatoes James Bond book, which is great, and that's what people expected, and I think that's why most of us really, really liked that one. I like the fact that they're taking they're deconstructing the formula to a little bit to make the James Bond universe Kim Sherwood's sandbox to play with, and I think that's really fun and interesting. Anyway, so what can we say about this book and how we feel about this book? I mean, obviously we Bond fans are just starved for Bond content. I mean, God knows what's going on with the movies. Ian Fleming Publications has actually been doing a really cracking job. So we had Double or Nothing come out, then completely by surprise, we had On His Majesty's Secret Service, which was a cracker of a book, really, really good. And now we've got this. And at the same time, you know, the Ian Fleming Publications have been relaunching the original James Bond books. They censored them. I'm still so salty about that. I can't believe it. Nothing from nothing. It's like it's like all these Bond fans have been screaming out in protest and they just ignore it. Oh, it's so arrogant. Anyway, but yeah, this is great because at least Ian Fleming Publications is doing stuff with this important intellectual property and they're giving people what they want. And they gave us Bond fans our meat and potatoes James Bond with Charlie Higson's book. And now we get, I don't know, the sushi, the vegan option, the how can you describe it? It's a different flavour of Bond, and I like that. I think having meat and potatoes Bond and then different flavours of Bond works really well in conjunction because you don't feel like if you want your meat and potatoes Bond, you're getting robbed of anything. And then people who normally just don't have any representation in meat and potatoes James Bond books get to be agents of agency in the James Bond universe. But I think it's worth pointing out that some people are skeptical about the new James Bond book, A Spy Like Me, because Double or Nothing didn't land with everybody. I think for the most part, everyone was really, really definitely embraced Kim. And for the most part, I think we embraced and supported the book, even if it didn't land with all of us. The fact that it landed so well with some people, I think, is great. I've mentioned before David Lobregelis from License to Queer. To see his reaction and his enthusiasm for Double or Nothing, it was just heartwarming. And I've noticed as well, there are a lot of younger readers. Like Bond's Basement sent me a message the other day saying that, oh no, was it Bond's Basement? Bond's Apartment sent me a message the other day saying how much he enjoyed the book. And it's like, I think younger readers, and when I say younger readers, I don't mean like young readers, I mean readers who are in their 20s, early 30s, I think embraced the book a lot more than perhaps older readers who are like my age, which is fine. I mean, that's the whole point of writing and publishing in this literary conversation. There's no point in writing a book for a 40-year-old audience and continue doing that because in 20 years we're a 60-year-old audience. You need to always be writing for a younger audience, expanding the group of people who might be attracted to this. And you can do it the right way by having a trilogy of books like the 00 trilogy, which, you know, tells a new story, reaches a new audience, or you can do it the wrong way by censoring the books and thinking for some reason that's going to expand Ian Fleming's original works to a broader audience. That's just stupid. But let's talk about how they're doing it the right way. Yeah, with the 00 trilogy. I think if we're going to talk the positive stuff, I mean, the fact that it is a James Bond trilogy. Oh my God, we love James Bond content. That is a huge bonus. It is really heartwarming to see people who might not necessarily see themselves represented in the James Bond literary universe have like protagonists who do that. And I don't think you can really understate the importance of that. It's really validating to see yourself in a book. When you read about a character who just like resonates with you, it's like you get swept up into that story and it's really exciting. And I think it's fair enough to say middle-aged guys like me who did feel that sense of connection with the literary James Bond. Maybe we don't feel that so much with the Double or Nothing trilogy, but that's because it's not necessarily written for us. We've got our representation. Our James Bond, the person we represent, is like literally missing in this trilogy, and so that's maybe why, you know, this is a trilogy in which it's not necessarily written for us, and I think that's a good thing. I will say, for the people who it didn't resonate with, there are generally two reasons, I think. The first is there's just a natural cynicism, I think, as you get older. And it's things like diversity and inclusion are words that get bandied around, but we tend to get a bit cynical about it because in so many places it's done like as a gimmick. What about all these movies where you get, you know, the classic original movie and they're like, let's remake it with an all-female cast? I mean, that just seems like a gimmick. It seems inauthentic. And on paper, I think with the Double or Nothing trilogy, you could be like, oh, I see, we've got a new trio of a 00 agents, and one is a Muslim, and one is black, and he's gay, and he's disabled, and the other one is a woman. And I think, to a certain extent, people are worried that you're just like clicking demographic boxes. It's like, okay, we need to have some diversity. Let's put some diversity adjectives here and just tick them off. And it's very important when you do something like that to write about characters so they feel like real characters. They are characters, they're not identities. Ian Fleming himself kind of did that in a cool way. It was like Wint and Kid, who you know, were heavily implied to be a gay couple. They were vicious murdering bastards who happened to be gay. And I think in certain movies and certain TV shows that are trying to tick the demographic boxes these days, you'll have characters. It's like, this is a gay character who is also a secret agent, and you don't want that. You want this is a secret agent who also happens to be gay. Whether you think Kim succeeded with that or didn't succeed with that differs depending on who you are. I think what she set out to achieve, you were always going to have people being cynical about. So she could get it absolutely perfect, and people would still be like, "Oh, she's just ticking demographic boxes." One criticism I heard is like there's one particular scene in which Joseph Dryden was, you know, in a fight in a pub because he was, being picked on for being gay, and it's very easy to say like, oh well, this is you know, you had to have the scene. It's kind of cynical. He could have lived his whole life without having that kind of targeting. But then people who actually are gay would be like, no, this stuff happens to us, and it's kind of validating to read about. So yeah, I don't think there is like a right or wrong answer with that. Either you appreciate what she's trying to do, or you don't appreciate what she's trying to do. I certainly didn't have any issue with any of that, really. I think that Kim set out to tell a story from perspectives of characters who are different to the ones that have generally, you know, been the focus of James Bond stories. And yeah, she could have got that absolutely perfect, and people would still criticize it and be cynical about it. So I really don't have any issue with that part. The second part that I think didn't hit with some people was just how she wrote the book. Double or Nothing is a big, chunky book. It's 100,000 words, roughly. And that's a beast. I mean, Ian Fleming targeted his books to be around 60,000 words long, which is a good brisk novel. And for the most part, I think he fell short of that. Some of his books were really, really quite short. And that's because he's a journalistic writer. I mean, Ian Fleming is famous for being a very journalistic writer, a man of very few words. So right from the get-go, it's like you get Double or Nothing, and it's like, this is a big, chunky book. And when you're reading it, you know, there's a lot going. Writing a book is like a craft. Anyone can write, but like to write a book doesn't just involve writing what happened, describing what happened. You've also got to do it in a way that tells a satisfying story. And the story structure is so vitally important to a good novel, a good film, a good anything. It's a thing called the story circle. I might have made videos about it before, I don't know, but it's like an 8 points on a circle that your characters have to go through to provide a satisfying story. And once you understand that, you can't watch a Hollywood movie or read like a genre book without seeing this structure here, and you understand, oh, this is why it's satisfying. This is why fairy tales was satisfying. They had a structure. And then when you actually get down to the nuts and bolts of writing, I think people think writing is easy, but it's not. It's a craft. You have to create a mental image in a stranger's mind using words. And that is most definitely a craft. And I think one of the challenges that Kim had in writing this first book is the fact that she is not a veteran author by any chance. She's written one novel beforehand. Written and published one novel beforehand, which is Testament, which I really, really enjoyed. It made me cry at the end, actually. This is more literature. But as far as literature goes, it was a really effectively written book. It's not necessarily a book you'd read for fun. It's kind of intense. It's kind of thick with grief. It makes you feel things. So it's very different to like the genre adventure thriller of James Bond. But it's a very well written book. So Kim has a definite excellent grasp of English. She is a very effective writer. But then again, she's an effective writer with one book. And that means that she might have, fewer tools in her tool belt as more veteran authors. And I'll get onto that in a sec. But for me, I think two things really stood out about Kim's writing that I found a little more challenging to read than Ian Fleming's books, or even books by like Anthony Horowitz, Charlie Higson, something like that. The first, that she writes long sentences. Like, she writes long sentences. That was one of the things. It wasn't really a criticism of Testament, because in Testament it's a literary book. So you go in and, when you are a literary author, you get to write your book your way. And I noticed that some of the sentences were very, very long, but I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. In Double or Nothing, I will admit, right from the very beginning, some of the sentences are really, really long. I'm going to read out one from the first few pages, in fact, right now. His chest was tight with smoke, which had poured down his throat like concrete, eager to fill a void as he followed the Syrian search and rescue volunteers into the fire. Digging through the rubble for survivors in the long minutes' wake of a cluster bomb, the Red Crescent warehouse groaning, keening until it swayed, walls crumpling and crashed in a cloud of render. That is one sentence. That is 61 words with no periods or full stops, as we call them in England, between that, just commas. That's a long sentence. I couldn't read that entire sentence without taking a deep breath halfway through. Let's read a section from Goldfinger. Right. This is a random section I pulled because I happen to have a PDF of Goldfinger open. The service door opened. The chauffeur stood in the frame. He still wore his bowler hat and his shiny black gloves. He gazed impassively at Goldfinger. Goldfinger crooked a finger. The chauffeur approached and stood within the circle by the fire. Every time I took a pause there, that was a period. So all of these, the longest sentence in that section that I had just read was 11 words. The average is 6 words. So, I mean, this is not scientific, but I would say the average length of a sentence in, say, Goldfinger was around 6 to 8 words. And Kim's sentence that I just read there is 61 words. So, that is a different writing style. And in some ways, the way she'd done it is beautiful, with the Red Crescent warehouse groaning, keening until it swayed, walls crumpling and crashed in a cloud of render. That's a beautiful descriptive passage, but it is different fundamentally to how Ian Fleming wrote. So that's why I think for some people it didn't quite hit in the same way. The other thing she does that's different to the way Ian Fleming describes things is, it's kind of difficult to explain, but it's like she constructs her sentences back to front, which I think is fine. I understand exactly what she's trying to do. It's almost like she's trying to paint a visual picture and then give a payoff. And Ian Fleming, as a journalistic writer, would give the payoff and then paint the picture. Let me give you an example. So again, from the very beginning of the book here. This is from Kim Sherwood's book. As the minutes ticked down, high above, a second black spot seemed to ripple from the lily-pad shadow of drifting clouds, descending the mountain. This second black spot zigzagged, and its own shadow was distorted by the unmistakable silhouette of a gun. The gun and the shadow belonged to Corporal Ilyasov, who was serving his first mission for Ratfanger PMC. So there we go. Perfectly serviceable paragraph, but she paints the picture, the visual picture first, and then gives the payoff. Let me read another section from Goldfinger. The car was coming closer. The 6 pairs of eyes, the eyes of the 2 men and the great twin orbs of the car seemed to be looking straight through the little window and into Bond's eyes. There you've got the payoff, the description, the car was coming, and then the descriptive passage afterwards. And it's a different way of doing things. And I understand where Kim's coming from. She's a very visual novelist, a visual writer. So she's painting a visual picture and then explaining what the picture is. But I have to admit, for me as a reader, I prefer having this is what it is and then paint the visual picture. So I said, it's not like there's a right or wrong way of doing it. I'm just saying that her style of writing is different to Ian Fleming's style of writing. And the long sections, I think, I don't know. There's a quote from Ian Fleming in an article he wrote called "How to Write a Thriller," and I kind of think it's an excellent guide to how he thinks things should be written. And he wrote, "You cannot linger too long over descriptive passages. There must be no complications in names, relationships, journeys, or geographical settings to confuse or irritate the reader. Above all, there must never be those maddening recaps where the hero maunders on about his unhappy fate, goes over in his mind a list of suspects, or reflects on what he might have done or what he proposes to do next." Well, first of all, Mr. Fleming, you broke that rule quite a lot of times in various books. I mean, I can think in that scene where he has to kill the Mexican, and it's very introspective. And yeah, so I think Ian Fleming did break this particular rule, but it is kind of an interesting one. The challenge Kim had in Double or Nothing is she had 3 distinct characters and an entirely new setup for the James Bond universe with like Moneypenny as the boss. And she had to establish relationships like Joanna's relationship with Sid, Joanna's relationship with James Bond. She had to establish those through characters' thoughts and things. That was challenging compared to how Ian Fleming would write James Bond. So there we go. I don't think this isn't so much these things, these observations aren't criticisms of Kim's book. I'm just pointing out that these might be reasons why some readers this book didn't resonate with them in the same way as, say, on His Majesty's Secret Service. But again, yeah, it's meat and potatoes versus sushi and something more exotic. But it brings you on to the whole idea of Kim Sherwood as a James Bond author. What an incredible opportunity for a young author to have, but also what an incredible burden of responsibility. This is why I've always been so keen to embrace Kim Sherwood, because she is a true bona fide Bond fan, and she's bringing something new and exciting to James Bond. However, I think it is worth pointing out that she has been expected by Ian Fleming Publications to punch way above her weight. The Double or Nothing was her second book. I mean, I'm not sure if she wrote, here we go, A Wild and True Relation, and it hadn't been published. Maybe she'd written this, but it was, when you're talking about written and published books, she had written 1 book and had it published before being expected to write a trilogy of novels about perhaps the most literally significant figure of the 20th century, James Bond. So that is an incredible burden of responsibility. And I think it's very important to point out, as Hemingway would say, writing is a craft which we're all apprentices and no one becomes a master. Writing is a craft. There is this idea, I mentioned it earlier in the video, where people think, oh, if it's easy to write, You know, I write emails all the time. I write letters. I know how to write. I could write a book. And if you're serious about being a writer, you get disavowed of that notion very bloody quickly. If you read books on a regular basis, you would get disavowed of that notion very, very quickly. I've got that book there, The Mad, Mad Murders of Marigold Way by Raymond Benson. I remember reading that book and being like, oh, this is writing. Got that. I've got some Lee Child books there where it's like you read it and you're like, oh, he's bloody good. It's a craft. It is like making a table. Your story structure is like the foundations, the four legs and the flat surface. And then the writing itself, you can use as like the little details, the finishing touches. But you can be the best writer in the world and your book would suck if you don't have the good structure in there. But if you have the good structure in there, but you're not the best writer, it can quite often be successful. I always use the Twilight books as an example of that. It's like Stephanie Meyer is not necessarily the most graceful writer out there. However, her structure resonated with people so deeply. So having a structure and being a good technical writer, writing is about communication. It's more important than being a good writer. And the only way you can learn the technical details of writing is by doing it. The more you write, the better you become. And I think that is a cold, hard truth about writing. It's like Kim Sherwood is a fantastically talented writer, a writer of clearly great ability. I think where she is in her writing capacity compared to most authors of that seniority is far, far above. But at the end of the day, the more you write, the better you become. I wrote and published 11 full-length novels before I had my first bestseller. I wrote 7 more books before I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get this. I still look back at a book that like made my writing career, that was making me $10,000 in sales every single month, and I read it and I'm like, oh, I could have written this a lot better, couldn't I? There's one particular thing. I used to, probably the first 15 novels I wrote, I would, every time I had I put a little comma in. Because, you know, grammatically that's okay. But when you read it, you're like, it's almost like you force yourself to take a breath before going on to the next part of the sentence. And it just is such a clumsy way of writing. And I'm like kind of embarrassed when I look back at the books that I wrote there. The more books you write, the better you become as an author. And when you're dealing with a character like James Bond, I mean, people are going to read this book regardless. And Ian Fleming Publications took a real fledgling author and thrust her into this very, very visible position of responsibility. And I think Kim Sherwood did a fantastic job. Honestly, it's amazing. But I think it is worth pointing out that if you have any criticisms of a book and a writing style, then you know what? Kim is punching way above her weight. And to give some examples of that, let me give you some facts and figures. This is fun. This video's gone on for half an hour. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if anyone's even watching it. But remember, Kim Sherwood had written and published 1 novel before she was commissioned to write this trilogy of James Bond books. John Gardner, the first real continuation novel, when he wrote License Renewed in 1981, he had already written and published 14 books and 1 autobiography as about his drinking hobby. How they got a teetotaler to write James Bond, I don't know. But that's 14 books, including one particularly popular series called the Boise Oak series. I think they'd even made movies about it. So, yeah, 14 books down the hole. Raymond Benson. Now, Raymond Benson is the outlier here. When he got asked by it was Guild Rose Publications back then to do the continuation novels of James Bond, he hadn't actually written any novels. No, he'd written the James Bond Bedside Companion, which people really, really liked. He had, however, written 10 video games, including 2 James Bond video games, and he'd written the You Only Live Twice role-playing game. And if you know anything about writing, like writing a video game media, writing role-playing games, you have to, it is all about structure. And it's all about structure and piecing things together so the characters can progress through the story in a satisfying way. I think that his background in video game writing was the reason why Raymond Benson's books, James Bond books, were so successful. And Raymond very kindly sat down and did an interview with me a little while ago. So if you haven't seen that, you should. Maybe I'll stick a video up here or have a link down there or something like that. But go and check that out. He's such a wonderful guy. But yeah, he hadn't written any novels before he got asked to write the first James Bond novels. He did a brilliant job. And I think the interesting thing is when Guild Rose Publications asked him to write the James Bond continuation novels, they thought that, you know, this was just something that the people who like James Bond movies would buy. They weren't really taken seriously at that point. And I think the fact that he had already written James Bond video games and a James Bond role-playing game and clearly understood structure and what the formula of James Bond was. I think that's why they picked him, thinking, you know, he's just going to knock out some novels, do this. But Raymond Benson, I truly believe, was the man who took James Bond from, you know, just a throwaway novel series for a bunch of people who watch the movies to people taking his books and thrillers seriously. He was a really good writer, and I think Raymond Benson elevated James Bond, from like genre written trash to like, hey, let's take note of these books, they're actually bloody good. And that moves on to Sebastian Faulks. I think that's why Ian Fleming Publications at that point was like, okay, Raymond Benson's no longer going to be writing these books. Let's take it seriously, okay? He's shown us that James Bond can be a well-written, satisfying literary character. We have the fact that, you know, all these years after Ian Fleming's death, people are starting to think of him as a serious writer. Let's get Sebastian Faulks in there. Sebastian Faulks had written 8 novels, or had 8 novels published before he got selected to write his James Bond book. And we're not talking about any novels, we're talking about Birdsong. I mean, he had a CBE for services to literature. Sebastian Faulks was a serious, bloody writer when he got brought on board. I mean, he had a really significant literary heritage. Jeffrey Deaver, when he wrote the next book, was that Carte Blanche? Yes, I think that was Carte Blanche. Jeffrey Deaver was a beast, man. Well, he still is a beast. I think he's still alive. 28 novels he had written before he got selected to write his James Bond book. 3 short story collections he published before he got selected. The Bone Collector, which is the first book in his like iconic series, had already been turned into a movie starring Denzel Washington. So Jeffrey Deaver, I mean, forget about it, man. He is a serious writer. And I know people didn't necessarily like his book. That's why he didn't write another one after that. And I can understand that. Setting James Bond in the modern day and the way he approached it didn't quite... It was an enjoyable book, but it didn't feel like a James Bond book. But like, yeah, you cannot criticize the structure or the competency with which he wrote that book. After Jeffrey Deaver had his shot, William Boyd came on to write a book that was set after The Man with the Golden Gun. And William Boyd, of course, had written 12 novels that had been published. He'd written a play. He'd written 15 screenplays that had actually ended up on the screen, including A Good Man in Africa, starring Sean Connery. He'd written 2 non-fiction books and had 4 short story collections published. So, like, William Boyd was, again, like a proper serious career writer at this point, and he had bridged that amazing gap between being able to write for the screen and being able to write a satisfying novel. Again, I know he only wrote the one novel. I think, you know, Ian Fleming Publications were they going through that thing of like, let's give a new novelist each time the chance to do it. I know when they wrote Colonel's Son, the whole idea was they'd get a different author to come in and write the books under the name Robert Markham. Maybe that's what they were doing. I don't quite know the details behind the scenes. After William Boyd, Anthony Horowitz came on board. Anthony Horowitz, man. Yeah, okay, so Anthony Horowitz came on board to write his trilogy. At the point he was chosen to write that trilogy, he had written 10 Alex Rider novels. Of course, Alex Rider had already been put on the silver screen. He'd written 2 non-fiction books about the gadgets and the mission files, the Alex Rider books. He'd written an entire 5-book series called The Gatekeepers. He'd written 7 children's novels, 3 short horror story collections, and 6 novels in the Legend series, plus 15 other novels, okay? I was unable to accurately count them because of my small squirrel brain, but we're talking about 40 novels published by Anthony Horowitz before he got selected to write his James Bond trilogy, which were chef's kiss. beautiful, really well written, satisfying books. But like, again, talk about a beast of an author coming on board with so much experience. He's like a master craftsman. Speaking about master craftsmen, let's talk about Charlie Higson, because everyone loved On His Majesty's Secret Service. When Charlie Higson was selected in 2005 to write the Young Bond series, he had already written and published 4 novels. And of course, he was a very, very accomplished TV writer. And I knew him originally from TV. He was in that sketch show called The Far Show, which was great. So Charlie Higson, again, was like, quietly an accomplished author with a pedigree. And he wrote 5 Young Bond novels. So when Ian Fleming Publications decided to ask him to write On His Majesty's Secret Service, it's like, yeah, he's got 5 really solid Bond novels under his belt. They might be young Bond novels, but they're still Bond novels. Plus the 4 novels he already wrote. I mean, and he writes articles all the time and stuff like that. Again, very, very prolific author with a very, very respectable backlog of books. After 5 books, Charlie Higson passed the reins of the Young Bond series over to Steve Cole, who wrote Shoot to Kill in 2014. Steve Cole, in 2014, had already had 46 children's novels published, 6 young adult novels published, and 12 Doctor Who novels published. So, like, bloody hell, mate. God, you look at that, and I'm like, oh, he was like my age. How come I haven't written 46 novels yet? I've written 30 or something, but that's a lot. So Steve Cole came on. Steve Cole doesn't get a huge amount of attention as a Bond author, but once again he came in as a workman, as a craftsman. He had written 46 commercially successful novels, 12 Doctor Who novels. I used to love Doctor Who novels when I was a kid. I've never read any of his, but I used to love them. They're really good books. I think even the Moneypenny Diaries. So Samantha Weinberg, writing as Kate Westbrook, was commissioned in, I think it was 2005, to write the Moneypenny Diaries, which are a series of books about Moneypenny. And I think kind of like Double or Nothing, they had the advantage of not being set in not being the main Bond continuity. And she perhaps is an outlier here, but she'd already written 2 non-fiction books that were really well received books. They're about mystery. There was one about the mystery of this mysterious fish, another one about the mystery of a series of murders and how DNA played into that. They were really well written books. And of course, she's like an internationally accomplished journalist and travel writer. So those are all the Bond authors we've had so far. I mean, I guess you could include Kingsley Amis, who wrote Colonel Sun, and I don't need to tell you Kingsley Amis's literary heritage. I mean, you can see what they had already written when they got asked to write James Bond is astonishing. And then Kim Sherwood had written 1 book, and she got asked to join this like select society of incredibly accomplished authors as a James Bond author. And I mean, like, wow. One thing you could have is like, why did they get an author who was so young and fresh? And the other thing is you can say is, yeah, they've got an author who's young and fresh. This is her trial by fire. She has now entered this club, this association of James Bond authors, and she has got to build the parachute on the way down. And so I think it's an incredibly bold and not necessarily wise choice for Ian Fleming to have gone with an author who is quite so fresh, but I think Kim Sherwood is knocking it out of the park. Okay? So when if you have criticisms of Double or Nothing, and I think there are legitimate criticisms you can have about it, I think it is also worth remembering just how she is punching above her weight. And I'm really excited to see what A Spy Like Me ends up like, because I've read all 3 of Kim's books, and I thought this one, as a literary book, this was like she could write what she wants, and this is a really moving and powerful portrayal of grief, and it made me cry. Double or Nothing, she wanted to tell a James Bond story that was different, and yeah, maybe there are things in that book that she could have done better. But when I read A Wild and True Relation afterwards, I saw that her writing had already tightened up. And the thing that I think is really good about this book is, yeah, sentences are shorter. It conveys the story and moves things along a lot faster. But she keeps the really powerful ways she can paint images in your mind. I mentioned before that her writing style is you paint a mental picture and then give the payoff of what it is, which is the opposite of the way Ian Fleming does it, which is tells you what it is, then paints the mental picture. But the brevity in which she paints evocative pictures is demonstrated very much in A Wild and True Relations. Like she uses key words and key adjectives to describe things, and they paint a wonderful picture in your head much more effectively. And that is a very Ian Fleming thing to do. So yeah, the more books she writes, the better writer she becomes, and she's yeah, what a better way to learn to be a really effective writer than to be thrust into the position of the spokesperson for one of the true craftsmen of like brevity and accuracy in word choice. So yeah, Kim Sherwood is getting better as a writer with every book she writes. I think A Spy Like Me could be phenomenal if it is as good as this, as well written, as well crafted as this book. I think a lot of people are going to be a lot happier with it, and she's not going to find the same mismatch in reaction. And yeah, that makes me kind of excited to see what A Spy Like Me is going to be. I like the title, I have to admit, A Spy Like Me. The Spy Who Loved Me was an interesting like outlier in the choices of James Bond books, because it was the first one that, it's the first title. It's almost like the has a subject in it, kind of. Well, you're the subject, The Spy Like Me, and The Spy Who Loved Me. I don't know. I like it. It's kind of interesting. Have to admit, it did make me think of that movie Spies Like Us, but maybe that's a play on it too. And I love these little nerdy things that she puts in. Sid Bashir as a character being named after Julian Bashir from Deep Space Nine. I was just like, nerdgasm. So yeah, I'm excited, and I think it's really important as a James Bond fan, even if Double or Nothing didn't hit the spot exactly with you. I think it's really important to continue to support Kim and continue to champion Kim, because she has such a burden of responsibility on her shoulders, and I think she's shouldering it with incredible grace. Grace is a good word. I only really found out what grace means. Grace is is the ability to sort of go on, yeah, gracefully despite the pressure. There's a huge amount of pressure on her. She's handling it brilliantly, but I think we, as the Bond community, need to support her and see what things she does with this trilogy. And I think we do. I think we do. I think as the Bond community supports Kim Sherwood entirely. I mean, she won Bond Community Woman of the Year last year in the Bond Community Awards. Oh, those were great. Whoever came up with those was a genius. Yeah, so I think we will continue to support it. But if you read Double or Nothing and it didn't quite resonate with you, give A Spy Like Me a chance, because I think it's going to be a different reading experience that is going to be a lot more satisfying for a broader audience, because I think Kim is really finding her feet. And yeah, that's the thing. Writing, as Hemingway said, writing is a craft in which we're all apprentices. No one becomes a master. You have to get into you have to meditate inside the mind of the author. And if you can do that without expectations or cynicism, it can be a truly wonderful, exciting experience. And I'm just excited to see it. So yeah, 48 minutes this video. Is anyone ever going to watch this? I don't know. I've just rambled on. But I think I've rambled on about kind of interesting things. But anyway, yeah, so Kim, we are excited to see your next book. Bond fans, let's get behind her, and let's see if Ian Fleming Publications can make up for that whole censoring the books malarkey and continue to give us what we want, because we want it. And you guys are giving it to us, and we will support you as long as you do that. So I'm going to wrap this video up before it gets to 50 minutes. Thank you for letting me ramble on. If one person hits like, I might make another video. If one person hits don't like, then I will go off and join a monastery or something. But until then, I will speak to you guys later. Ciao.
I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.